started with our program this morning. So hopefully you enjoyed your breakfast. And I'm Summer Long. I am the County Extension Director and the 4-H Development Educator. We are happy to have Chris Hurt with us this morning to go over the crop outlook. He's an ag economist with Purdue University, so I'll turn it over to him and he will get going. So thanks, Chris.
Well, good to see you this morning. Is it a good morning? We're here. That's good morning for a lot of us when we get gray hair, for sure. So great to see you, and great to have a chance to talk a little bit about agriculture and kind of where we see things headed. And I'll give you a little overview just so you kind of know what we're thinking about. We're going to talk a little bit about a boom period in agriculture that we're well aware of behind us, and then what we're calling a moderation period that we're going through. We don't think this is going to be a bust kind of a situation like the 70s and 1980s. There are obviously some characteristics that feel like that, but the downside is not nearly as intense as what we saw during the 1980s, but some of the same elements. Some resetting of agriculture back to more normal kind of times. Our sort of guess is that when the history is written on this time period in the early part of this century for agriculture, what we're going to say is what was abnormal. Well, what was abnormal was the really extreme high period of prices and profitability, and now we're trying to reset to something that's more sustainable for the long run. That process takes multiple years to work through, just like the process on the upside as you think about it, and you think about where land values were when we started in late 2006, what cash rents were in late 2006, and maybe what your input costs were in 2006. That took multiple years to build up to the top levels that we got on input prices as well as land values and cash rents. So now we kind of get the escalation, and now we've got to reset to something that's more normal, and nobody exactly knows what that is. But we're using something in the range of $4 corn, and don't take that as exactly $4, but probably high threes for the 16 crop, getting up to $4 as we go into 17 and 18. And on soybeans, maybe around $9 a bushel on soybeans. Now, if you think about your cost structure, if you ever put that together in a cost structure and say, well, it come out dollars per bushel, we certainly have people that still have a cost structure maybe more like $5 on corn per bushel, and $12 per bushel on soybeans. And if your cost structure is in that area, then obviously if we're going to be $4 a bushel corn on the next 2-3 years, we're really going to have to strive to find ways to drive that cost lower. So I think that's kind of a theme of where we're going to go. We're going to talk about this as being, we need to take $50, $60 out of cash rents an acre, but it's not going to, and it'll probably happen, is our guess, but it's not going to happen in 1 year. So we're talking about several years, probably 3 years. We were at our table here over breakfast talking about how long will this adjustment take. And we kind of center on a 5-year adjustment, but that adjustment started with the 14 crop, and we now have the 15 crop we're marketing, so 16, 17, 18. We've got this year, this 2015 crop that we're marketing now as the worst of those years financially, with still really tight negative margins for some with the 16 crop, but not as bad. So with that little bit of background, let me explain a little bit of how we get here, why we think that way. And of course, that's based upon our reading of what we call the fundamentals. The basic fundamentals of agriculture were driven by the big demand increases back in from 2006 to 2010-11, and we unleashed a lot of production around the world, a lot of supply increase, and now the past several years supply has been bigger than the usage, and we get this resetting of prices. So we'll talk about that, but what we want to suggest is that we really think there are sound economic reasons why we're going to go through this moderation, and we're in this moderation period. So let's look at some pictures that kind of help us get some of the overview into perspective. And we'll start with on the corn and soybean side. Mostly, I think what I brought today was talking about the grains. And look at the yields on corn. And USDA's final numbers were not quite a record national corn yield, but getting close to that record from 2014. And if it hadn't been for Indiana having substantially below normal yields, that national number would have been right up there around 171 bushels. So a lot of acres of corn, and with good yields, these production numbers over here on the right-hand side, getting up 13.5 to over 14 billion bushels, has just been more than what the market is able to use. And so we're increasing our carryovers, and when you have more carryover, generally you're going to have lower prices. Now, a lot of the drama of what we came through obviously is shown. I think you can probably hear me okay, can't you, without the mic? It's easier for me to talk without the mic. Just holler and I'll use it. So look back to the left-hand side of that graph. That's back in 2000. And you look at the size of the corn crop, 9.5, maybe 10 billion bushels. And then the ethanol mandate came in, and that required 3 billion additional bushels of corn from the 2006 crop to the 2010 crop. So that was just simply more use than what we had the ability to provide in that short a time period. And so what we ended up with is demand just growing faster than supply. And when you have that situation, you end up with very high prices for a period of time. Now, I'm sure you've heard and well aware that ethanol demand growth leveled off, went from a shooting up like this. After 2010 crop, by 2010 crop, we reached 5 billion bushels of corn use for ethanol. And it's pretty much flattened out with just a little bit of growth since the 2010 crop. We're marketing the 2015 crop, 5.2 billion bushels, so just slight increase in that ethanol side of things. So that's clearly one of the factors. The demand surges that we had, those leveled off after the 2010 crop. So you can see that surge. Congress asked us to do that. The president signed that legislation, and you did it. You provided the market with 3 billion additional bushels of corn demand usage that we had not had before. Our problem has been that we haven't gotten that cut off more in this 13 and a half, that we've continued to have the acreage and of course the last 2 years good yields. Now remember, 2 years of good yields, if we hadn't had those, if we'd been average yields, hey, we'd probably been pretty close to $4, high $3 to $4 corn. So again, I think that $4 range with a normal yield would be pretty consistent. Now on corn, we've been reducing corn acreage for the last 2 years, and we expect, or at least our estimates are, that we'll cut acreage on corn nationally again this 2016 crop. So we see favoritism in our budgets for soybeans, better financial returns on beans than corn. And so we think nationally we'll probably see some shifting out of corn and to soybeans. Now that's not saying here in Indiana, and it's not saying in Clay County, but we're saying on a national basis we'll continue to see a little bit less corn planted and more soybeans. So that gives us this optimism that we'll see some better prices on corn as we go into this fall, 16 crop versus the 15 crop. As a consequence then of what we have been seeing most recently of the world producing more than is consumed, what you tend to get is increasing inventories around the world and lower prices. Now 2012 was a drought year, we'll all remember that one, so that we had record high prices that year. U.S. average prices of corn about $7, and then 13 crop $4.50, $3.70. This crop currently $3.60 a bushel. Now Indiana, with the short crop we have a strong basis. Normally we're about 10 cents a bushel over the national price there. This year we're probably going to average about 25 cents over that national price. So I'm going to guess we'll be around $3.85 a bushel here for Indiana. But normally we're about 10 cents on corn and soybeans. Soybeans 14.5 roughly, 13.10, under $9 a bushel. So you can see this progression, just like we had the progression going up the mountain of higher prices, maybe not every year, but over time, higher and higher prices. Now we've got that progression of lower and lower prices. And so the biggest thing that affects your price is these basic supply and demand, how much is being used in the world and how much is being produced. And so we leave with this thought here, what year is going to be the bottom? And to the extent that the world continues to produce more of corn, soybeans, or wheat than the world consumes, you'd say the prices haven't even reached the bottom yet. Now, again, we're hearing more about financial stress around the world, of other producers that are struggling somewhat to produce with these kind of commodity prices. But, and again, as we look at next year, we think we begin to see the carry-out on corn start to come down with some stronger prices, but we keep carry-out on beans at the same or a little bit higher level and drop bean prices a little bit. We'll look at here in a second. So again, this is just basic stuff, and it is how much is being produced and how much is being consumed. So that's the big thing that's going on. When we look at those balances, we can get some perspective and how sensitive our grain prices are to the inventory levels. Let's look at corn first. That's the blue line down here at the bottom. And let's go back to 2010, 2011, 15%. What is that? We're looking at the world inventory or stocks as a percent of the world usage, a year's use. So at the end of our marketing year, which ends in August, the end of August each year, we'll go back to this 10, 11, and into 12. We had about 15%, the world had 15% inventory or corn inventory as a percent of a year's use. So 15% of a year's use was in inventory. And of course, those were record high prices. So the way the world evaluates that is, oh my gosh, we're running out of basic food ingredients. We're too tight. There's going to be starvation in the world. And the world gets very concerned about lack of availability of basic food. And you have record high prices. Countries like China, they're very concerned about food policy. After national defense, second on their list in China is feeding the people. Now again, we don't even have that on our list in the United States because of the abundance of the United States, but China does. Feeding people is number 2. So when these inventories in the world got very short, China, they changed their policies and they said, we're going to buy more corn and put that in inventory. We're going to buy $7 and $8 bushel corn and build up our inventory. And we are going to give our farmers a lot of incentive in China to produce corn. So they got corn incentives for Chinese producers up around $9 a bushel. They were providing subsidies of various kinds to get farmers to produce corn. Now, again, if they just come to me, I would have told them, what you do is you build inventory when there's an abundance and prices are low. Go read the Bible, you know, that's the problem. You build in the good years your inventory. You don't build inventory when the world gets tight. Well, this is the way, that's where they ended up. They had lots of corn inventory back in here in the early part. Prices were cheap. And China in about 2003 exported corn to the world market to basically dump their inventories at very low prices. So wrong time, you're doing this at the wrong time. When it's cheap, that's when you want to be building inventory, okay? So again, they got mixed up on this, and when it was real tight, they start deciding they're going to build inventories. So this again is another problem, not so much today, but there was some thought back before Christmas that China would actually start selling corn into the world market and put even more downward pressure on prices. Now again, they've basically just taken those incentives out so that the price incentive isn't so much to produce corn in China. And again, I don't think they're going to sell corn. They've got corn. They don't really want to, they can use that in their livestock industries. But they're not, that means they're not going to buy as much from the rest of the